Chapter 10. A few days later, Wednesday stepped out of the old cottage, fully recovered, her limbs stiff but serviceable. She was dressed in black again, a fitted dress with long sleeves and a modest hem that brushed her boots. Black clothing was unusual in a Puritan-style town like Jericho in 1620, where earth tones and simple linen garments were the norm. But Wednesday had never been one to care about blending in. Black shoes, often leather, were often worn by the well-off or those in mourning. But seeing someone dressed entirely in black, especially a young woman, would have drawn stares. And it did. The remaining normies in town lowered their heads and averted their eyes as she passed. Not out of reverence, out of fear, out of uncertainty. As always, Wednesday ignored their stares. She moved like a ghost among the living, her posture straight, expression unreadable, boots crunching softly over the packed dirt road as she made her way into the town hall. Joseph Crackstone's old home had been repurposed into a meeting house and assembly hall. A fitting irony. Inside, the room was in chaos. Outcasts and normies, those who hadn't fled, were either shouting or arguing. Some stood, fists clenched. Others sat, whispering harshly. Voices overlapped. Accusations flew. "You can't just take our homes," a normie woman yelled. "This is our land," an outcast boy shouted back. "We were here first. Your ancestors were banished. And your ancestors were thieves who came with papers and guns and called it peace." The room was a battlefield of words. Then, thump, thump. Thing jumped onto the podium and knocked sharply, grabbing everyone's attention. He skittered up Wednesday's arm and perched on her shoulder like a sentient punctuation mark. Tyler stepped forward from the crowd and leaned close. "What did I miss?" Wednesday didn't even glance at him. "Just a bunch of flutes arguing." She made her way to the front and stood beside Goody, Marcus, and Petunia, the core outcast leaders. Goody whispered a summary in her ear. "The outcasts want to build our own school on the riverbank where Crackstone's house stands. But the normies claim we're stealing land that's theirs." Wednesday stepped forward. "May I remind you," she said calmly, "that we won this war. Your leader is gone. So we will be setting the terms of your surrender." Gasps and mutters rippled through the room. Tyler stepped beside her and murmured, "Are you really going to do this like the American Indian treaties?" "That's exactly what I'm planning," she whispered back. "Only this time, I won't let them whitewash history." The crowd quieted as Wednesday laid out the terms. "First," she said, voice sharp and cold, "the normies will honor the outcasts' claim to these lands. We were here first. You can keep the land your houses sit on for now, but you will not expand further. Second," she continued, "that land is not yours. He is no longer here to contest the claim, and his vision has crumbled to ash." "That's not fair." A normie man stood up, red-faced. "That's Crackstone's land. You can't just take it." "We won. You lost. Get over it," Wednesday replied without flinching. "I am invoking the law of conquest." Murmurs broke out again. She raised her voice. "Yes, the law of conquest. The victor claims the land of the defeated. That is how history has always been written. And this time, I'm the one holding the quill." Finally, she said, "So there can be no further argument." She stepped back and knocked twice on the mantel. "This meeting is adjourned." No one left the hall. The outcasts remained in their seats, uncertain. The normies stood in tense clusters, staring daggers at the front. Tyler walked over and stood beside Wednesday, shoulder to shoulder. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly, glancing at the town square through the window. "Written in stone? Aren't you worried about how this is going to affect our time?" Wednesday didn't look at him. Her voice was calm, steel under velvet. "Would you rather we keep worshipping a genocidal maniac with a messiah complex?" The outcasts shifted uncomfortably. They hadn't expected Wednesday's terms to be so final. A few of them raised their hands, voicing doubts. "Is it really right to carve this agreement into stone for everyone to see?" one of them asked. "What if things change?" Wednesday turned to face them, sharp as a blade. "You're being short-sighted," she said. You just want land for a school. I want a monument, a sarcophagus the size of a cathedral, to remember how this war started and how it ended. They exchanged uncertain glances. That might be a bit much, someone muttered. Wednesday let out a cold scoff. History will favor the better story. The room exploded into argument once again. Voices clashed. Old wounds reopened. But Wednesday's mind had already begun to drift to the strange, broken history that led to present-day Jericho. Somewhere along the way, the story changed. The normies couldn't handle being remembered as the ones who murdered innocent outcasts. So they rewrote the story, recast Joseph Crackstone as a misunderstood peacemaker, not the fanatic he truly was. But Wednesday wouldn't let them erase it. She slammed the mantel with her knuckles. The room fell into silence. Then she said something that made everyone take a step back. Death doesn't discriminate between the sinners and the saints. It takes, and history obliterates in every picture it paints, you and all your mistakes. Tyler blinked, stunned. Was that Hamilton? She turned to him with a hint of amusement in her eyes. I like stories that rhyme, even when they bleed. Facing the crowd again, Wednesday raised her voice. You have two choices. You can paint history in black and white, where the normies came to our land and set fire to the old meeting house with outcasts still inside, where we fought back and we won. Her tone sharpened. Or we paint it gray. A story where no one wins and no one loses. A story of bloodshed, yes, but also of survival. A place where both sides came together and forged something new. She looked over both sides. We don't need truth. We need a compelling story. One that unites or one that divides. One written in ash or one written in stone. The message was clear. Either they paint a picture of unity or they paint one of blood, loss, and defeat. The meeting had ended, but Tyler lingered behind with Wednesday beneath the glow of the lanterns now flickering inside Joseph Crackstone's former estate. The town hall was quiet, but the tension from earlier still clung to the air. Tyler stood with his arms folded, uneasy. You really want to carve it in stone? Yes, Wednesday replied without flinching. You know this could change everything, right? You're not even worried. She turned to him. Why are you so obsessed with the logistics? I'm worried because we have to sign it with our last names, he said. You can hide behind your goodie. Since she's ancestors. I don't. If I leave a mark here, people in our time might start asking questions I can't answer. Thing, who had been listening nearby, scuttled forward and began to sign. Tyler looked down. Change my last name? To what? Thing shrugged with an unhelpful flourish. Wednesday didn't answer. Her mind had already wandered back to her family's infamous crypt, to the carefully kept records of every Addams who had ever lived and died. Her name was in there. Wednesday Addams, born. But what if she had always been recorded as Wednesday the 2nd? Or worse, what if history corrected itself and she disappeared entirely? Despite the town's grumbling protests, Wednesday refused to let up on her demand. The stone contract would be etched, signed, and displayed at the center of the square. Let history choke on its shame. The normies couldn't bear the thought of such a public, permanent declaration of surrender. Whispers of rebellion brewed in quiet corners, under oil lamps and behind shuttered windows. Then one night, long after the town had gone to sleep, Goody summoned the most capable and trusted outcasts to meet in secret. Tyler and Wednesday were among them. They met in a candlelit cellar beneath Crackstone's former estate, now enemy ground claimed in victory. There were about a dozen of them. Healers, seers, scholars, and fighters. I don't trust the normies, Goody said plainly. They lost today, but hatred doesn't die so easily. We need something permanent. A force that watches, that guards our kind. Tyler looked uncertain, but said nothing. One of the others, a young warlock, raised an eyebrow. You want to form a secret society? A society of nightshades, Goody said. A network hidden in plain sight. We will not repeat the past. Wednesday, standing at the edge of the circle, stepped forward. I support it, she said. Prejudice is a weed. You can cut it, but it always grows back. Someone has to prune it, or burn it at the root. And that's how it began, the Nightshade Society. A secret order formed not just to protect outcasts, but to safeguard the truth. The real history, not the whitewashed version destined to be rewritten by fearful hands. As the group began to disperse, Wednesday pulled Goody aside into the hallway. Sign the contract, she said. For both of us. Just one Addams' name. Goody blinked. But why? Wednesday's eyes didn't waver. It's important my name doesn't exist at a certain point in history. Goody studied her for a long moment and then slowly nodded. You're hiding something. I'm protecting the future. With a quiet nod of understanding, Goody said, then I'll make sure it stays hidden. It took weeks to find the right stone. Wednesday wanted something massive, unmovable. A monument that would stand for centuries. Not just a contract, but a declaration. One carved in stone and left in the center of town like a scar. The outcasts argued endlessly in the meeting house. What to write? What story to tell? No one could agree. The normies, meanwhile, dreaded the thought of their surrender being immortalized. A permanent record of their shame, etched in granite for all to see. Must it be stone? One merchant whispered. Parchment fades, Tyler answered. Stone remembers. Eventually, a slab was sourced from the stony hills of what would one day be called Vermont, carried, dragged, and levitated inch by every outcast power and pulley available. It arrived in the dead of night, cold, heavy, and full of judgment. While the stone sparked endless debate, Wednesday and Tyler turned their attention to something far more vital, the future. They began to teach. Nevermore was to be a school for outcasts, exclusively. That much Wednesday never wavered on. But even so, the teaching had already begun long before the walls were laid. Classes were held, ironically, in Crackstone's old house, now repurposed as a crude schoolhouse. It was cramped and miserable, barely enough room to sit, let alone breathe. So, when assessment day came, Wednesday, against her better judgment, agreed to move the event outdoors to the town square under makeshift tents. It gave the children air. It gave the townspeople nowhere to hide. And it gave the normies their first real look at what had changed. At first, they came out of suspicion, some even amusement. They expected chaos, perhaps finger painting and failed spelling. But what they saw was something else entirely. Children, once considered lost causes, stood tall and spoke clearly. They read aloud in English and Latin. They recited arithmetic without pause. They traced maps of far-off lands and quoted from books no one in town even owned. And behind it all was Wednesday. She was strict, composed, and frighteningly intelligent. Every answer was met with either praise or correction, never coddling. She moved like a woman carrying the weight of history on her shoulders, because she was. She teaches like someone raised by scholars, one of the midwives whispered. No, said the Reverend's wife. She teaches like someone who knows what comes next. By contrast, Tyler was softer. He encouraged, he listened, he smiled when they stumbled and gently corrected their grip on quills and slates. When one of the children burst into tears mid-rhyme, it was Tyler who knelt and whispered something calming. The child sniffled, wiped their eyes, and finished the verse. It was during this moment that something shifted. Until now, education had been rare, even radical. In 1620s colonial America, formal schooling was nearly non-existent. Most children, if taught at all, learned only enough to read the Bible or handle sums for the family business. Girls were rarely educated. Poor families had no access. Outcasts? Never even considered. And here were Wednesday and Tyler, teaching outcasts. For free. The townsfolk didn't know what to make of it. Many had never seen a woman read fluently, let alone teach. Even fewer had seen a boy with no title or church backing speak with such quiet authority. What unnerved them more was that the children were listening. How are they so well educated? One of the farmers asked. Are they from noble blood? Were they sent from across the sea? No one could answer. No one dared ask Wednesday directly. The assessment ended when the children were asked to recite Monday's Child. But instead of the usual rhyme, the students had rewritten it, renaming it Friday's Child, in honor of the unity they hoped to build. Monday's child is fair of face. Tuesday's child is full of grace. Wednesday's child is full of woe. Thursday's child has far to go. Friday's child is loving and giving. Saturday's child works hard for a living. But the child who is born on the Sabbath day is bonny and blithe and good and gay. Not every child performed well. Some froze. Some cried. But the town applauded anyway. The normies laughed, yes, but not cruelly. Something about the way Wednesday watched the children, hands behind her back, boots planted firm in the dirt, was undeniably noble. Something about the way Tyler held out a hand to each crying child made people feel. It was uncomfortable. So when, after the tents came down, a few mothers hesitantly approached Tyler and asked if their children might attend, it shocked even them. Just for an hour a week, one said. He can't read. She needs to be taught more than prayers, another murmured. She wants to learn. They asked Tyler, not Wednesday. She was too strange, too sharp around the edges. But Tyler smiled and said yes. It didn't take long before the whisper spread. The witch and the boy are building a school. And not just for outcasts. But Wednesday made one thing clear. Nevermore would always be for those who were unwelcome elsewhere. The rest could borrow a lesson or two, but the sanctuary belonged to the ones who needed it most. Chapter 11. While the town had come to respect Wednesday and Tyler for their intelligence, and for being among the few willing to teach, their feelings about the couple's public behavior were decidedly more complicated. Everyone agreed they were excellent educators. But socially? They were a riddle wrapped in a black ribbon and set on fire. There was something about the way they existed around each other, something too intimate, too quiet, and far too oblivious to the norms of Puritan sensibility. It was like watching two ghosts communicate in a language no one else understood. They spoke in half-sentences, shared glances that required no words, and hovered in each other's space, as if no one else were there. "Do they not see us standing here?" one of the elders whispered after Tyler tucked a lock of hair behind Wednesday's ear mid-sentence. And it wasn't just their closeness, it was the gifts. Tyler would casually hand her a basket filled with dried, dead flowers, some of them thorned, some of them fragrant, all of them wilted. Another day, it was a small, bloody bird, the spoils of a quiet morning hunt. Once, a curious object wrapped in velvet, something black and delicate from a traveling merchant's cart. He would place it in her hands without a word. She would nod, sometimes smile, and that was that. No explanation. No performance. Just two people in a strange, wordless rhythm. When the townspeople gathered the courage to politely suggest they tone it down, the couple simply blinked at them, genuinely confused. "Indecent?" Wednesday asked. "We're not mating in the mud." Yet, Tyler muttered, earning a raised brow from her and a collective gasp from the sewing circle. Eventually, people gave up trying to understand. But something else happened instead. The women of the town, wives and daughters who had grown up in cold marriages and colder kitchens, began to notice something. Tyler knew what Wednesday liked. And not just in a vague, gift-giving sense. He knew when she was overwhelmed and handed her silence. He knew when she was anxious and drew her away from crowds. He remembered that she hated warm bread, detested white roses, and preferred dried herbs over perfume. He paid attention. And suddenly, there were conversations behind closed doors. Husbands being asked, "Do you know my favorite flower?" Young men being elbowed and told, "You could learn something from that boy." The blacksmith's wife reportedly threw a pot at him when he brought her daisies instead of the witch hazel she once mentioned liking a year ago. Respect turned into curiosity. Curiosity turned into gossip. And gossip inevitably turned into the question that echoed through the markets, across fence posts and over laundry lines. When are those two getting married? At first, it was whispered with exasperation, like a problem that needed resolving. But as the months passed, the tone softened. It became a hopeful sort of wondering, the kind old women used when talking about weather and grandchildren. The town, for all its suspicion and prejudice, had begun to root for them. Because in a world filled with hard winters, strange magic, and uncertain futures, Wednesday and Tyler had carved out something warm and unmistakably rare. Whatever it was real. The normies breathed a collective sigh of relief when Wednesday declared that the treaty carving would be postponed. It wasn't out of mercy, it was logistics. The stone she had chosen, enormous and jagged, had no smooth surface large enough to properly etch the full agreement. After inspecting it up close with a disapproving eye, Wednesday ordered the entire boulder to be chiseled and polished until it resembled the stone tablets of the 10 Commandments, only this one would be 10 times bigger. Presentation matters, she muttered to herself, arms crossed as stonemasons groaned at the weeks of labor ahead. In the meantime, Wednesday worked tirelessly on drafting the treaty. It was more than an agreement. It was, as she put it, a formal declaration of conditional surrender. The terms were uncompromising. The normies would honor the outcasts' ancestral claim to the surrounding land. Normies could keep the land their houses currently sat on for now, but expansion beyond those borders was forbidden. Joseph Crackstone's estate would be relinquished and turned over to the outcasts to become Nevermore School. Finally, a permanent monument would be erected in the town square, a literal carving in stone, detailing the truth, who came first, who came second, and who lit the fire in the meeting house that burned emissaries who came in peace. It told the uncomfortable history of land grabs, betrayal, and the war that only stopped when the flames failed to consume Wednesday Addams. A war that was lost, not ended. The document was to be signed on parchment the following day for record-keeping, before being transcribed onto stone. 2 pages, one containing the treaty itself, and the other reserved for the signatures of the founding families. But not everyone was so willing to see history carved in granite. Far beyond town borders, Joseph Crackstone, very much alive and embittered, had gathered a few remaining loyalists. His followers, scattered now across neighboring settlements, had not forgotten the old ways. And when word reached them of Wednesday's plan to enshrine their defeat in stone, their outrage turned into purpose. They would not let this shameful monument rise. And Crackstone? He was no longer interested in debate. Wednesday Addams must be removed, he hissed. Permanently. The next day, townspeople gathered at the square under the overcast sky. Makeshift tents were erected around the unfinished monument. The air was heavy with anticipation. One by one, the heads of normie families approached the parchment. Mothers, fathers, grandfathers, some of whom had fought in the last skirmishes, hesitated at the table. One last time, they tried to reason with Wednesday. "Must it be written that way?" one man asked, his voice tight with frustration. "Could we perhaps find a more unifying version?" Wednesday didn't even look up from the parchment. "Either we tell the truth," she said flatly, "or we keep painting lies in black and white. Your choice." There was a long silence before the man lowered his eyes and dipped the quill in ink. Reluctantly, the normies began to sign. Some did so bitterly, others quietly, a few shamefully. Then Wednesday stepped forward and signed her name at the bottom, not as Wednesday, but as Wednesday Addams. Tyler followed. He wrote Tyler Galpin, not Galpin, in clear, careful strokes. A hush fell over the crowd. Whatever this was, whatever they had built, it was real now. No longer a war. No longer a truce. It was history, written in ink for now, and soon in stone. After the signing ceremony, Wednesday handed the parchment to Marcus and Petunia for safekeeping. She trusted them, they didn't talk too much, and knew the weight of history when they held it. One scroll held the treaty, the other, the signatures of the founding families. Wednesday tightened the straps of her backpack. Inside was her grimoire, some essentials, and Thing, curled up in a nest of folded cloth. Tyler was already waiting. He nodded toward Nevermore, now rising from the ashes. Its skeletal frame cast long shadows in the late afternoon sun. "Let's go check it out," he said. They walked in silence through the edge of the woods toward the river, where the normies were careful to keep their distance from the construction site. Nevermore, though incomplete, was unmistakable, a stubborn promise. They passed the new boating dock, one of the first things completed. Water transport was still more reliable than anything over land. Tyler casually reached into his pocket. "Found my keys," he muttered. "Still in my pants." Wednesday turned to him. "You still can't remember what happened that night?" He hesitated, jaw tightening. "No." Wednesday looked away. Tyler asked quietly, "Do you still want to go back?" "After all of this?" Wednesday took her time answering. "Things are less complicated here. People don't lie about what they are." Tyler shrugged. "I miss the basics, electricity, plumbing, the smell of actual coffee." "I do miss convenience," Wednesday admitted. They reached the unfinished halls of Nevermore. Dust, timber, lantern light. Everything echoed too loudly. Then, without warning, darkness. When they woke, it was night. They were tied, hands and feet, in a fishing boat drifting across the river. The water was silent. The moon was high, blue ringed with red. Cold crept into their bones. Joseph Crackstone stood at the edge of the boat. This time, he didn't monologue. "Burn in hell," he said, and dropped the match. Flames caught. His men pushed the boat away from shore. Behind him, Nevermore was already burning, bright and merciless. Things scrambled from the backpack and started to untie their ropes. Water lapped violently. The boat tilted, then capsized. Darkness. Underwater, everything was frantic. Wednesday kicked, twisting against her bindings. Her lungs were seconds away from giving in. Then a hand reached her, Tyler's. He pulled her upward. Just as they surfaced, something dragged them back under, something unseen, cold and angry. Then just as suddenly, it vanished. They burst from the water. Tyler dragged Wednesday to the dock, flipped her over, and started mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. She coughed up a lungful of river water and choked out a breath. Before she could sit up, a voice called out, "Are you okay?" It was Xavier. They both turned. He wasn't dressed in modern clothes. He was holding a flashlight, modern, bright, blinding. They looked down. Wednesday was wearing her black dress, black stockings, and black sneaker boots. Tyler was back in his hoodie and jeans. Up ahead, Nevermore stood, completely intact. Its windows glowed with electric light. They were back. Wednesday returned to Nevermore, while Tyler went back home. They both changed out of their wet clothes and collapsed onto their beds, speechless. Eyes closed, hearts pounding, neither could bring themselves to speak. Maybe, just maybe, they'd wake up tomorrow and everything they'd experienced would turn out to be a dream. Meanwhile, back in time, chaos erupted. Torches lit the sky as outcasts stormed the square. "Bring me Joseph Crackstone," Goody shouted, her voice sharp with fury. The outcasts surrounded the normies in their beast forms, fangs bared, claws drawn. Crackstone stood on the platform gripping a mysterious staff, hurling spells and commands, but he was hopelessly outnumbered. The werewolves tore through the area, searching for any trace of Tyler and Wednesday, but all they found was a partially burned fishing boat. The sirens dove into the river, searching its depths. Others scrambled to put out the fire, still smoldering in Nevermore's frame. By dawn, Joseph Crackstone was captured, tied and restrained at the top of the ruined platform. Goody stood nearby, waiting for news. But the search party returned empty-handed. The sirens had found nothing. The wolves had found no trace. Wednesday and Tyler were simply gone. Goody walked into the meeting house, Joseph Crackstone's former estate, and began throwing furniture, breaking anything she could get her hands on. Then she collapsed to the floor, sobbing. And that's when the vision came. Flashes of fire. A finished Nevermore burning. Wednesday still in her signature black attire fighting Joseph Crackstone with fury in her eyes. Goody froze, breath stolen by the truth behind the vision. Her mind reeled back to every moment they'd shared. She remembered the way Wednesday spoke, her strange phrasing, her knowledge. She remembered Wednesday once saying her grimoire was over 400 years old. Then it hit her. Wednesday and Tyler weren't just from another place, they were from another time. For centuries into the future. And in that future, Joseph Crackstone was remembered as a hero. That was why Wednesday had been so determined to put the truth in stone, literally. That was why she insisted it be carved, why it couldn't just be signed on paper. If history was always rewritten, then maybe stone was the only way to preserve it. She turned slowly toward the treaty stone, its surface still unmarked but smooth and ready. From atop the platform, Crackstone chuckled darkly. You think that stone will last? It'll be desecrated. Forgotten. History only remembers what it wants to. As long as my side refuses to agree, you'll never have a legacy. Goody looked at him, calm now. You're right, she said. Then she walked back inside. In the wreckage, she searched through Wednesday's old drafts. One sheet caught her eye, a question scribbled in Wednesday's handwriting. How did Joseph Crackstone become the hero in history? And just beneath it, a single-word answer. Unity. Goody stared at the page, the pieces finally falling into place. Every hero needs a villain. If history casts Crackstone as a unifier, a protector, then the outcasts must have been rewritten as the threat. But now, with her vision, Wednesday fighting in a finished Nevermore, it could only mean one thing. They had made it back to their time. And that meant the story wasn't over. It had just begun. Chapter 12. Eden shook Wednesday's shoulder. Get up. You have to get to the weather vane before it's packed for the festival. Wednesday blinked awake. Her eyes felt dry, like she hadn't slept at all, or maybe like she'd slept for 100 years. What festival? She croaked, sitting up slowly. For Loving Friday, obviously, Eden said, already halfway through yanking open the curtains. It's like this town's weird knockoff Valentine's Day. I told you people wait until today to go on romantic dates. But you and Tyler just had to get yours over with last night. You seriously couldn't have waited. Last night. Wednesday stilled. They had fallen into the river. Water had closed over her head, ice cold and endless, and when they'd surfaced, they weren't in the present anymore. They'd landed in 16th century Jericho, a place twisted by fear, fire, and silence. For weeks, months, maybe, they'd fought to find their way back. She could still feel the soot in her lungs. Still hear the villagers shouting. Still taste the ash. And now, Eden was talking about brunch. What the hell is Loving Friday? Wednesday asked, her voice flat. Thing popped out of the backpack at the foot of her bed. He stretched like a sleepy cat and scrambled up to her shoulder with a soft thud. His presence grounded her, oddly comforting, oddly real. I'm still mad at you, by the way, Eden added, arms crossed. You bailed on me when I needed help studying, only to tutor Tyler behind my back. Rude. Tutoring. Wednesday echoed, her brows drawing together. Wait, what day is it? Friday, Eden said, eyeing her with mild concern. Like I said, Loving Friday. Are you okay? Wednesday didn't answer right away. She glanced around. Her dorm room looked the same. The air still smelled like pine cleaner and Eden's floral shampoo. But she felt like a ghost inside her own life. Because somehow, when she and Tyler came back last night, soaking wet and shaking, not even a minute had passed. The world had simply blinked. One moment, they were drowning in smoke and screams. The next, they were standing on the riverbank right where they started. As if time had folded around them like a trap. She dressed in silence and followed Eden out into the morning haze, her boots clicking against the polished floors of Ophelia Hall. And that's when she saw it. In the rotunda, a statue. It hadn't been there before. Marble. Unlabeled. Just a boy and a girl. She could tell it was a girl by the curve of the jaw, the way her shoulders squared defiantly. The boy had his arms around her, shielding her from sculpted flames that rose around their feet. Wednesday stared. It hit her like a bucket of ice. Wednesday, Eden called. Come on. She didn't move for a moment. The statue said nothing. No plaque. No artist's name. No date. Just there. Like it had always been. But it hadn't. She would have remembered this. "I'm coming," Wednesday said, eyes narrowing. On the bus, Ajax approached Eden and Wednesday with a hushed voice. "Hey, Xavier said you and Tyler capsized in the river last night. Are you okay?" Eden turned, eyes wide. "What? Why didn't you tell me?" "You were sound asleep," Wednesday said without emotion. The town looked possessed. As they got off the bus, Wednesday stared at the streets in genuine horror. Garlands of dark purple and blood red roses hung from lamp posts shaped like skeletal arms. Pink and black hearts were plastered across building walls, some beating softly, enchanted. Plush cupids with fangs hovered above storefronts, their arrows dripping what looked suspiciously like ink or something thicker. Normie families wore matching red and pink. Outcast teens wore black lace, heart-shaped goggles, or face paint that made them look like undead Victorian dolls. It was like Valentine's Day had wandered into a Tim Burton film and refused to leave. Thing pointed at a plush cherub. Wednesday headed straight for the weather vane. She spotted Tyler outside, wiping down tables and getting heckled. "Modern Tyler." Lucas, Mayor Walker's son, called out. "Careful," one of the others added with a grin. "Your girlfriend is 2 days early." They burst out laughing and strolled off. Tyler looked confused and annoyed. "I have no idea what's going on," he told Wednesday the moment she reached him. "People keep calling me the modern Tyler and making jokes I don't get." "Did I miss a memo?" "I'm just as baffled as you are," Wednesday replied. Tyler wiped his hands on his apron, brow furrowed. "Last night, when I got home, I thought I was screwed. Like, I actually braced for Dad to yell at me, ground me something. But it was like we'd never left," Wednesday finished. "The clock was the same. The sky was the same." Tyler nodded. Elvis was still curled up in the same spot on the porch. "I checked twice." Wednesday looked around the plaza, then back at him. "We were gone for months. Long enough for your hair to grow." "Exactly," Tyler said. "But we came back and nothing. Not even a minute had passed." He hesitated, then smirked faintly. "You ever read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe?" "I read it. I also read The Magician's Nephew." The allegory was heavy-handed. "Okay, sure," Tyler said, "but remember how they spend years in Narnia. Grow up, rule kingdoms, become legends, and then they walk back through the wardrobe and it's like, no time passed at all?" Wednesday was quiet for a beat. "So we're Lucy? I guess." He gave a dry chuckle. "Minus the fawns and eternal winter. Plus more witch burning." Just then, Sheriff Galpin's voice rang out from inside the cafe. "It's Galpin with AP. And I swear if I hear one more Loving Friday joke." He came in, looked between the two of them, then sighed. "If you two are going out today, wear disguises or something." Tyler handed Wednesday her quad espresso before sliding into their usual booth at the weather vane. Dr. Kinbot walked in, humming to herself, and stopped when she saw them. "Well, if it isn't Jericho's most stubborn couple," she said playfully. "Are you heading out for your Loving Friday date before spring break? Or are you two staying behind and giving the town something to gossip about?" Wednesday stared blankly. "Don't worry," Kinbot added with a warm smile. "No one's going to try to kill you two just for being together. We've all moved on from the pitchfork era." She left them with a wave and went to place her order. Miss Thornhill entered soon after, ordered her tea, then glanced over at them. "Still together," she mused. "Good. Don't let anyone make you feel ashamed for that. What the town feared before, it now celebrates. That's progress." She walked to her usual seat at the center table, sipping her tea like a queen in exile. Tyler pulled out his phone. "You're not gonna believe this," he said, nudging her shoulder and showing her the screen. "Loving Friday traditions in Jericho, Vermont. It's actually a thing." Wednesday sighed. This town has an unhealthy obsession with romantic martyrdom. But she read anyway. Loving Friday is a holiday commemorating the tragic love between Friday Addams, a witch and healer of the outcast community, and Tyler Galpin, a normie settler. Before the normies came, Jericho's land was home to the outcasts, shapeshifters, seers, and other supernatural folk who lived in balance with nature. Their community thrived until normie settlers, led by Joseph Crackstone, arrived in the 1620s. At first, the outcasts welcomed them. But Crackstone, driven by hatred and greed, began claiming outcast land for himself. He manipulated other settlers with fear, starting a quiet war through deceit and violence. Despite the rising tension, Friday Addams and Tyler Galpin, two young leaders from opposite worlds, fell in love. After the outcasts defeated Crackstone in battle, Friday and Tyler led the post-war negotiations. They brokered a peace agreement. The normies would return stolen land and be allowed to settle peacefully elsewhere within Jericho. To prove peaceful coexistence was possible, Friday and Tyler made their relationship public. At first, both sides were skeptical, an outcast witch and a normie settler in love, but their bond gradually became a symbol of hope. Joseph Crackstone, however, condemned their relationship as an abomination. He claimed it was proof that the outcasts had bewitched and corrupted the settlers. He used their love as fuel for his rhetoric, warning normies that peace would lead to impurity, chaos, and spiritual ruin. A large stone slab was prepared, intended to serve as the normie declaration of surrender to the outcasts. But before anything could be carved, Crackstone retaliated. Enraged that a school for outcasts was being built atop his land, he kidnapped Friday, tied her inside the building, and set it ablaze. Tyler died trying to rescue her. Their deaths changed everything. Instead of a declaration of defeat, the stone became a public apology, a shared monument of regret from both sides. Today, a statue of Tyler shielding Friday from the flames stands in the rotunda of Nevermore Academy, the very spot where their bodies were found. The Jericho Stone Monument bears the names of outcast and normie founders who vowed never to let hatred blind them again. As she finished, Wednesday's jaw clenched. "This is revolting." Tyler blinked. "No, I think it's okay." She looked up from the screen, face pale. "I am nauseous at the idea of our time in the past being repackaged as some sentimental folktale for toddlers." "Who came up with this lie?" Tyler hesitated. "Will, it's mostly true." Wednesday turned slowly to stare at him. "Mostly true." "Galpin." Tyler kept his voice low. "You know, I wrote my name as Galpin instead of Galpin, so no one would trace it back." "Friday," he said with a smile. Wednesday leaned back, her fingers tightening around her cup. They turned a massacre, a betrayal, and political manipulation into a tragic love story. "It's not that bad," Tyler muttered. "At least they kept the stone monument. That's something. And for what it's worth, at least now we're not worshipping a genocidal maniac." "Right." Tyler didn't argue. He just reached for her free hand and held it under the table, quietly. Thing peeked out from her bag, sensing the tension, and gave her shoulder a comforting tap. Outside, paper hearts and black roses danced in the wind, symbols of a past nobody really understood. "Not like they did." "Where are you going?" Tyler asked, rising halfway from his seat as Wednesday suddenly stood up. "I'm going to Pilgrim World," she said, slinging her bag over her shoulder. "If it still exists and still goes by the same name." He blinked. "I'll come with you. I told them I'd end my shift early anyway. Figured you might want to do something, given it's Loving Friday." He jogged into the back to change and clock out. A few minutes later, they stepped outside into the crisp, Valentine-hued chaos of Jericho's hybrid celebration. Black roses hung beside pink heart banners, with strange outcast sigils tied to lampposts between candy carts and handmade charms. It looked like Halloween had made a truce with Cupid. They passed through the square on foot, heading in the direction of Pilgrim World, but then slowed as they came upon the Jericho Stone Monument. A massive boulder, smooth on one face, carved into like a dark mirror of a tombstone. Two main texts stood etched there, one on each side of the monument, etched deeply and weather-worn, but still legible. Wednesday stepped forward, eyes narrowing. The side facing them read, "We, the normie founders of Jericho, acknowledge the violence and deceit carried out in the name of progress. We condemn the actions of Joseph Crackstone, who acted on hatred and personal ambition, not in the spirit of peace. He does not speak for us. His crimes are his own, and we accept the shame of not stopping him sooner. We apologize to the outcasts for our trespasses and vow to support the rebuilding and protection of Nevermore Academy." Below that was a separate text. "We, the outcast elders of the time, accept that vengeance does not heal wounds. In our retaliation, we too caused pain. We grieve the loss of trust, of neighbors, of peace. We mourn the deaths of Wednesday Addams and Tyler Galpin, whose bond reminded us what unity could look like." "It's a back and forth," Tyler said quietly, his eyes scanning the stone. "Normies taking most of the blame, though. At least they admitted Crackstone was a genocidal maniac," Wednesday muttered, arms crossed. But her jaw clenched as she reached the end of the normie text. She said, "There's nothing here about how he burned the meeting house with the outcasts inside." She continued, her voice flat. "I suppose that part was too inconvenient to carve into stone. Too brutal to be pinned entirely on one man. Maybe it was intentional," Tyler said, leaving it vague. "Can't say it without implicating others." "No," she said. "They just didn't want a permanent reminder that their founding fathers committed mass murder." They moved around to the other side of the stone, where dozens of names were carved. Founding families. Normie and outcast, interwoven now in the same list. Two names stood out immediately. Addams. Galvin, with AV, not AP. Wednesday exhaled through her nose. "Subtle. Still enough to recognize if you're looking," Tyler said. "I doubt anyone looks." She traced the carvings with her fingers. Her own name. His. Changed just enough to turn them into folklore. "Let's keep going," she said abruptly. "Before I vomit on sacred stone." Tyler gave a short nod, following her as they turned from the monument and continued down the old path toward Pilgrim World. When they arrived at Pilgrim World, Wednesday came to a full stop just outside the archway of its chipped wooden gate. A heart-shaped wreath hung from it, bleached twigs spray-painted pink. The smell of popcorn drifted faintly from a food truck parked too close to the entrance. She looked around, utterly unimpressed. "This is offensive," she muttered. "Because of the popcorn?" Tyler asked, following her gaze. "No. Because this is supposed to be Jericho in the 1620s. The village consisted of 3 crooked cabins with plastic thatch roofing, a few half-empty barrels stacked in a corner, and a fake blacksmith shop that had been turned into a candle-making station for tourists. The roads were paved. There were no carts. No straw. No stench of manure. There was no lingering smoke from hearths or the coppery smell of freshly slaughtered meat. There weren't even any flies. "This isn't even close to accurate," Wednesday said, disapprovingly. "In the real Jericho, you'd smell the town before you saw it. Mud everywhere. Animal droppings. Blood in the streets from butchering. Open fire pits. The air would be thick with smoke and sickness. You'd find horses, donkeys, a communal well, and stray dogs covered in fleas. Most buildings would have thatched roofs, not shingles. People cooked over open fires or baked in shared clay ovens." Tyler smirked. "So, you missed the part where the town smelled like a rotting barn and no one bathed?" "I miss historical accuracy." He stepped past her, looking around. "Still think it's an upgrade. Indoor plumbing is a win." She arched a brow. "The old fudgery, they didn't even have fudge back then. Could have made it an apothecary instead," he said, strolling by the fake general store. "You know, healing herbs, dried mushrooms, maybe a snake in a jar. Something actually useful. Or a weaver's hut," she added, following. "Or a tannery. A proper blacksmith, not whatever that is." She gestured at the booth where a teenager was hammering floral keychains into soft aluminum. There should be a bakery with hard black bread, probably sour, she went on. And a midwife's cottage. That was essential. If they wanted to be authentic, they'd have a stocks platform for public punishment. Yeah, that would go over great with school tours. Reality isn't supposed to be comfortable, she said, eyeing the sanitized setup like it was a crime scene. This is not preservation. It's a commercialized lie. Tyler leaned against one of the wooden rails, eyes scanning the pastel banners and synthetic hay. They probably skipped all that because they thought it'd scare off the tourists. She said, "History is supposed to haunt you." They entered the meeting house. Tyler looked around, visibly impressed. "Hey, look, real cushions." He flopped into one of the chairs with a pleased sigh. Wednesday didn't return the smile. Her eyes scanned the room, sharp and calculating. "At least they used real taxidermy this time," she muttered, stepping farther in. She moved toward the wall and paused in front of a plaque. It read, "When the meeting house burned out after the war, the townspeople resumed their assemblies in Joseph Crackstone's former home." At that point, he had already been exiled. Wednesday's mouth tightened. Of course, they conveniently left out why the original meeting house had burned down, or who was inside when it happened. Her gaze drifted upward to a large painting hanging on the far wall. It was a strangely civil, yet chaotic, depiction of a historical meeting. The room in the painting was crowded, full of tense figures on either side of a long table, normies on one side, outcasts on the other, all mid-argument, fingers pointing and mouths open. At the center of the table, however, sat a girl in a black dress with two dark pigtails, calmly writing something on parchment. Wednesday's expression softened. At least they kept her appearance intact, even her overall disposition seemed accurate. Beside her stood a tall boy leaning forward, one hand resting on the table, the other gesturing as he spoke with a smile. Behind them stood three other outcasts. One was unmistakably Goody Addams, with her blonde braided pigtails and solemn gaze, nearly identical to the girl at the table, except standing and clutching a thick black book to her chest. The other two must have been Petunia and Marcus. Petunia looked relaxed, arms crossed, while Marcus stood tall and regal with a stiff posture and pale skin. And near the door, half hidden in shadow, lurked Joseph Crackstone, watching everything with narrowed eyes. Wednesday stepped closer and read the small plaque beneath the painting. This historic artwork depicts the final negotiation between the Normie Council and the Outcast delegation. Seated at the table is Friday Addams, transcriber and co-leader. Standing beside her is Tyler Galpin, acting liaison between Normie and Outcast. Behind them, Goody Addams, twin sister of Friday Addams, Petunia, delegation representative, and Marcus, vampire envoy. At the door, Joseph Crackstone, then recently ousted. Wednesday rolled her eyes. "Of course they still call us twins," she muttered. "I told them we were just relatives." She paused. "Though I suppose it's hard to argue when we look nearly identical." "Hey, come look at this," Tyler called. She joined him by a display behind a velvet rope. Inside a frame hung a preserved document, yellowed with age and slightly wrinkled at the edges. The original terms of the surrender. Tyler leaned in. This was supposed to be carved on the monument, wasn't it? Wednesday read it silently. The document laid out the terms of truce. The Normies would return the stolen land and grant the outcasts autonomous rights to Nevermore. In return, the outcasts agreed to peace, and the Normies could remain in Jericho under strict non-aggression conditions. At the bottom were dozens of signatures. Some she recognized. Many she didn't. But two names stood out, clear and deliberate near the bottom. Friday Addams. Tyler Galpin. Beneath the frame was another plaque, smaller than the one below the painting. This was the original joint declaration, intended to be carved onto the monument at the center of town. After the deaths of Friday and Tyler, the text was replaced with a formal public apology. Though not all accounts agree on the events, both Normie and outcast parties acknowledged that their inaction contributed to the tragedy that followed. Wednesday's eyes lingered on the document. Her name. His name. Carved in ink before they were carved in stone. They rewrote the ending, she whispered. Yeah, Tyler said beside her, voice low. They did.